6 years. How time flies. I guess you could say 6 or 7 years. Okay, let me stop. I'm gonna have to dislike my own video for that one. Jokes aside, it would have been a little funny if they just pushed it back a month so it could wrap up in a nice, expensive, forgotten 7-year-old present with a messy bow on top. But it's not like it really matters at the end of the day. As you may know, despite the immense potential it truly had, Anthem has finally met its end, as EA has now shut off the game entirely as it was an online-only game, and the servers have now been Thanos snapped. I'm coming here today with this video to not only look back at this game that had a lot to say about itself in the industry at the time, but also how the shutdown proves that despite all this time, nothing has really changed in AAA gaming when it comes to the decisions as well as the faults that Anthem had. Aside from maybe some small learnings, I think it's best that I categorize this video into 3 sections. The general state of the game, since I also did a recent replay of the campaign, I'll talk about the game's development issues, and ending with how they tie into even recent years of the gaming industry's habits. When the initial announcement came of the server shutdown, somebody was probably sitting there thinking, wait, the server's still up? And I was right there with you, but at the same time, it was a shame to know the poor life of this game would end with nothing to really show for it. I'm also not coming at this topic as an outsider, as I actually did play this game at launch since I was one of the poor souls excited for this game. And I learned this past week when I decided to reinstall the game for one final playthrough, that was worse than that. I had this shit pre-ordered. And that's from someone who knows to almost never pre-order, so you know I really wanted the best for this game. Side note, it's crazy that this was so long ago that I had this game on Xbox since my ass ain't even had PC yet back then. But anyhow, I never really got into Destiny aside from trying betas and free play days, but was a Warframe fan for years at that point. So the lead up to this game and calling it the Destiny killer, I didn't exactly preach, since I swear that kind of talk literally kills games. But I was hoping for something I could really sink my teeth into since it looked so damn good. Anthem seemed to have a lot of promise between the visuals, the smooth flying system, as well as its really impressive combat design with a satisfying mechanic like the Prime Detonator system. I also had no problems with how the combat felt and had a really fun time with it. But then things get kind of weird once you look past that point. BioWare is known as one of the greats on their RPGs and even more so on their storytelling, but with what the nature of this game is, it's really hard to put a pin on what the narrative direction is supposed to be. Of course, it's definitely weaker than most of their previous games, but I didn't see it as bad. And in fact, some of the characters I actually quite enjoyed, like the main crew. Not his lame ass though. Fuck him. The writing definitely had some MCU writing vibes, but I wasn't against that sort of thing unless you go too far into it, like the Forspoken direction.
Did I just do that?
Well, definitely with my assistance.
I did not just do that.
We did.
I just move shit with my mind.
Perhaps our connection has somehow awoken some abilities.
I just moved shit with my mind.
I just keep hearing I.
I just move shit with my freaking mind! That is something I do now. I do magic, talk to sentient cuffs, kill jacked up beasts.
Or the Thor Love and Thunder route. I felt like the game had some characters a little too corny, but all in all, it was an okay time, but nothing memorable. What makes this worse though is that it's a multiplayer, always online game. So if you're playing with your crew and there's just so much random dialogue, even when you're playing the missions, so then like if you're, dealing with that and then also talking to your friends, there's just so much freaking noise. So why would you pay any attention to the characters or the story? It's not like it's a single player BioWare game to even attempt to appreciate that. And in my recent play, although I played solo, it was already hard to catch things as I was interacting with my Twitch chat. So just imagine a group of like 4 people talking, Another disconnect was also the hub area known as Fort Tarsis, which immediately threw me off since it had an annoying first-person camera, even though the actual game was third-person, so it felt really disorienting, especially when you can't even seem to change the sensitivity of that camera, so it was like really slow. I got used to things, but that experience can be jarring and also does take away from the core gameplay experience, and it also is kind of annoying when you consider the amount of times you gotta go talk to this NPC or that NPC. I also still don't know why they added pointless dialogue options for them, by the way. And then you gotta slowly pace across this hub. I almost forgot to mention, it genuinely confused me why there was a select an appearance option if you never see yourself. Not even in the hub, since it's in first person. So let me rush up out of this hub though, like most players were trying to do themselves, and get back to the gameplay talk. Now, what the hell was the loot system? I didn't remember much about it from the early days other than it needing a ton of improvement, but upon my replay, I was shocked that I couldn't even see the loot that I was getting during my missions. Like, whether it be when you pick it up or having to check your inventory, like, this game had none of that. Just rare item, uncommon item, etc., which immediately felt just dumb. When researching some more for this video, I even realized that the original E3 demo reveal displayed loot that you picked up, and I just couldn't help but laugh, which apparently the game excluded an inventory screen because it would have took too many resources for the game to run properly. Okay. Anyhow, the loot was very boring to get throughout my campaign, and I was surprised that the missions don't like end with a chest or something to give the player something more satisfying as they clear a mission. Something, but nope, nothing at all. Sometimes you'll get like some mid drops from an enemy or something like that, but I had not a single moment of excitement mid-mission over a loot drop. Not that I even know what I was picking up anyway. The actual loot content slash upgrade path was whack too, because although the thought of different artillery slash abilities for each javelin seemed cool to want to dive into, I pretty much got low quality versions of every skill very early into the game. And then the whole campaign run was just incremental updates of those handful of abilities and weapons. So I just never felt like I was experiencing anything new loot wise. And it's a shame too, since trying to figure out which of these abilities could prime an enemy and which of them could detonate them in a satisfying way that like fits my playstyle is a fun process. But again, I just didn't see much for new abilities after those first couple hours. Speaking of not experiencing anything new, that brings us to mission design. I'll get more into it in a bit, but you can really tell flight in this game was truly not the direction until late. Some people complain about the overheating stuff, but I actually liked it since it was a factor in your positioning, taking advantage of the world, so just like the waterfalls, like cooling your jets, and how you use your skills, etc., etc. And I also thought the missions with the no flight zones were a change of pace on how you need to play your character. What drove me crazy was how 90% of these missions involved sitting in a tiny green zone where your character flies. I don't mind something like that once every blue moon, but almost every mission had this as part of the run. And what makes it worse is that if you leave this zone, this tiny little circle, the objective literally will not progress. So between that and killing the same like 2 or 3 enemy types thanks to the lack of enemy variety, would lead to a pretty jarring experience that even fun flight and combat couldn't save. There was also this time that I had a collecting orbs mission that looked like this. Yes, this gave me a headache, and my original footage of this corrupted, but imagine this, but even brighter. So how can I even see what I'm looking for? When looking for other footage of this mission, you can tell how jarring it is if you're a player with darker settings playing at night. Another thing that was surprising to me was the lack of flight-oriented missions in terms of like platforming sort of stuff. I don't know if that's the right words to use, but like early in, they would have me fly past these like obstacles to kind of show me like, oh yeah, I can fly around, which I thought was neat, but then I never really saw anything like it again after that, outside of a single enemy type, which was just a matter of like jumping over the attack, but nothing like actually like using your maneuverability to get around certain things. Endgame is something that's always a topic in these sort of games and discussions, but I'll keep it short because my replay only consists of the campaign and a few missions afterwards, and I also cannot recall much of my early days other than the apparent 36 hours I put in back then, and that I wish there was more to offer than the same repetitive missions for the same repetitive loot. I will say, they did better than the end of Suicide Squad, where they didn't just tell you that you didn't actually beat Brainiac and there's like 13 more versions of him you gotta fight with, which basically means just 13 more updates to come. They left the story open and teasing a potential new saga, which was fine, but then they smacked me in the face with a checklist that proved my point on the repetition. So what's next for Anthem's journey? It doesn't seem like even BioWare knew. They may have sold 2 million in under a week, which is great by the way. That wasn't confirming that it would match EA's unrealistic goal of hitting 6 million in just a month. especially as the news of the problems were circulating. A lot of BioWare were going to be working on Dragon Age next, and as for the remaining Anthem team, I had high hopes as the gameplay I still loved, and I knew the game could turn things around. Until the messy ass roadmaps. These content roadmaps were ultimately not only produced out of fear, but also the content that was thrown out wasn't enough for the game to really bounce back in the ways it needed to. I personally feel like this approach was just way too rushed and messy, as when you look back, they clearly tried to shoot out whatever they could in that first year, when ultimately they could have just focused on quality of life updates here and there, on community feedback, and then cook in the meantime. That way they can have something massive for like a potential 2.0 moment much later. Like, imagine the amount of hype and attention the game could have received if they sat, cooked for over a year with a big expansion, which would land around COVID when everybody and mama was at home gaming more than ever before. Instead, they tried blowing their load way too early, paired with false promises to the extent of removing roadmaps they set up, and also being very radio silent and closed doors to their community on how to improve the game afterwards. I feel like despite the problems, being open to communication to improve your game really can go a long way. For example, you got Final Fantasy XIV, No Man's Sky, even Fallout 76 has fans now, and if I want to use an EA example, Star Wars Battlefront 2. But of course, by 2021, the decision to give up was made, throwing the remaining Anthem Next team to help finish Dragon Age, which, take that game how you will. I can go on about the potential this game had, but we'd be here even longer than we already have, so maybe I'll sprinkle some here and there so we can get on to talking about this game's development. After everything I've learned about this game's development cycle, a great way to express it is what seemed like an expensive-ass game of musical chairs. From the years of conception all the way to release, it's baffling how many important roles at BioWare were lost from departures from the studio. There's a whole list, between directors, writers, creative directors, producers, you name it. As you can imagine, trying to conceptualize and develop a game under these conditions is madness, especially when BioWare is also developing games from multiple locations. So we have a lack of leadership, a lack of direction, and an extreme lack of communication. I'm surprised this game even shipped at all, to be honest. Truthfully, SpongeBob has the best visualization for the studios of this game. In fact, these studios were not only a victim of poor communication and management, but apparently they were also beefing on the value of one studio's work on the project versus another. So now there's this weird ass relationship between BioWare Edmonton and BioWare Austin when they're supposed to be working together transparently. I feel that probably the most important flaw in this game and its development is its identity crisis. With the lack of leadership to actually spearhead this to their teams, no one actually even knows what they're making. It's just a broad generalization of a third-person shooting live service game. This game didn't even really get into full gear on development until roughly 18 months before release, which is just crazy. Shout out to SpongeBob because he's got another perfect example on what this development process looked like. All these years seem to have been all sorts of prototypes and demos so they could figure out what they're even trying to make, which was also the case with the biggest aspect of this game, flying. I mentioned earlier how there are parts of this game that don't seem to have flight in mind for the design, and that's because it wasn't even planned. This game had taken the feature off and on a few times before fully locking down on the decision, and you can imagine that decisions like this not being made have led to an assortment of messy additions or retractions from the core game. They also had zero semblance of who the core audience is, which is truthfully the most important thing about not just games but any form of media, to be honest. BioWare has a stacked history of single-player RPGs, and here they go with a multiplayer live service and don't know who they're even trying to cater to. They weren't even sure whether to go all in on looter shooting, or RPG mechanics, or story, or what. And to make matters worse, they for whatever reason were ignoring instead of evaluating comparative franchises in the industry that were proving to do well. The gameplay could stand on its own as a game different from others, so it wouldn't have hurt to pull from core ideas that work from existing games. The only later choices like this I noticed was the inclusion of an area similar to that of the Monster Hunter Gathering Hub. But the point is, they should be looking at these sort of things mid-development that would cater to the audience they're trying to reach. Instead, it seems like they guess they're making a looter shooter and they guess they're gonna shoot for a 70 on Metacritic, which is never how you should be approaching launching a game. It's even harder to do this too because they have to put so much into the systems to make a great looter game, since that's what it's all about. As opposed to if they were just making an action RPG where they can make general improvements, sure, but they can have a better time refining and adding content, instead of just perfecting every fundamental aspect of a looter shooter live service. An amazing source for a lot of this information is Mark Dara in his 3-part series on what really happened to Anthem, who was the executive producer for Anthem and had a ton to say about this whole process. In fact, just the other day, he released a 3-part series in like one package as one beefy video, so I can leave that in the description below. Although he was executive producer for the game, that wasn't until around 2017, which was that short window I mentioned began where they would actually work to ship the game out by 2019. Around the time of joining the project, it reiterates that SpongeBob analogy I mentioned before, because he was very confused as to why, even though only one mission had been completed at this point in its development cycle, how the team wanted to just keep reworking that same mission over and over instead of moving on to do more. Obviously, it would make more sense to get more experience by building more missions, but here we are now with the game with a lack of mission variety. Artists don't get better at drawing and redrawing the same image over and over, erasing it until it's right. They just draw more art and grow that through that experience. The team didn't seem to understand that memo though. I also briefly want to mention that EA's forced use of the Frostbite engine is also a huge hurdle, as it makes it much harder for teams to develop certain systems to their game if they don't have the proper tool set already, so we just get wasted time on these development cycles trying to cater and understand a new or different engine. The team just seems so behind on any and every aspect of this game, even the javelins themselves. Apparently we were going to get potentially 6 playable javelins, so like 2 normal, 2 heavy, 2 light, but not only would that take more time, but they didn't even have ideas for that many javelin either, which is unfortunate to hear. Personally, I think tunnel vision development can limit a team as well, because I feel like if they looked outside to see games like Warframe, which has many different characters that aren't even categorized in such a way, and tend to also be very different and creative from each other, then they might be able to look outside that lens and figure out something for those future Javelin updates. Now, the reason I wanted to go over all of this was not just to shit all over Anthem. As I mentioned before, I wanted to see this game succeed, and I would be there for sure if it ever tried to come back. I wanted to go over this game's development, rise and fall, because despite the game coming out 7 years ago, and the game being conceptualized like 14 years ago, Anthem exposes systemic problems that still exist in AAA development today. The end of Anthem also forces us to confront things that the industry still refuses to fix. A great way to start this is by referencing what they tried to start Anthem with, a 10-year plan. We absolutely need to stop going into these live service games with these insane levels of expectation to just take over the world when the game hasn't even shipped yet, let alone really even existed yet at the time of that statement from EA. Time and time again, these companies have these massive, lucrative ideas of how live service is the long-term answer to more and easy money, and not whether these titles have the substance to even earn the revenue they're seeking. Look at how wasted the PS5 generation has felt because of how Sony wanted to commit to 12 live service games, and we saw how well Concord popped off with its estimated $200 to $400 million budget and huge planning with tie-ins such as the Amazon Secret Level episode dedicated to it. We also see how well having so many studios working on projects turned out, as many BioWare studios have shut down or merged, and the few we have couldn't even cooperate for Anthem. You can imagine how expensive as well as lacking in focus that can be for a game, and Ubisoft are the kings of having too many cooks in the kitchen and losing tons of money in the meanwhile. I still can't believe the Assassin's Creed Shadows credits were over 2 hours long. Anthem was also created around the time of normalizing unfinished live service launches. In the years to follow, we even get the biggest games falling victim, as games such as Halo Infinite, which released unfinished after many delays, and while still not being content ready at launch, couldn't even sustain the player base with enough content over time, which that issue can be attributed to developing games and content on harder engines as well, making it take longer to get out the content to meet the demand. There may be a lot of gloom here, but with the amount of bad decisions in the industry, I'm at least glad that more publishers are starting to understand to just use engines such as Unreal to get the project done, as it has many tools the developers are used to, and more people in the industry are familiar with it. Even the next Mass Effect, if it still happens, is reportedly being built on Unreal Engine 5. I just hope that in the meantime, we also get out of this habit of making fake demos of games that aren't actually a proper representation of what's available behind the scenes, as Anthem did this with their 2017 reveal, and the same happened with Perfect Dark's presentation not even being a properly playable part of the game, which shortly after we see how much of a facade that trailer was with how quick it got cancelled. I think I'll end this talk with not only the most common gaming industry mistake I see today, but the very one I still felt was Anthem's biggest problem in its conception, which was its lack of identity and intended audience. We have seen time and time again in recent years how these games just get announced and no one in their seats know who the fuck it's for. Between the earlier mentioned Concord, the dumpster fire that's going on with Bungie's Marathon, and don't get me started on Splitgate trying to make FPS great again with a BR and $80 bundles in the year 2025. Developers need, especially in live service, a direction on what they're making and who it caters to, and whether there's even enough of an audience for it that's not already consuming something else. I feel like when I think of recent online games that have done well, they've had these things in mind, whether it be how Marvel Rivals went for the hero shooter audience while tying it with the Marvel audience, or how Arc Raiders went for the extraction shooter audience, which is still hard to capture, yet was able to do so by directing the game towards emergent moments and varied interactions with other players. Even Marathon didn't have proximity chat. Like, hello? Or how Helldivers 2 dominated the year it came out because of the very directed tone and fun cooperative nature for it to have a strong dedicated community to this day. Anthem can be talked about for hours on its troubles and development, and honestly this industry can be talked about for hours on how it's still replicating many of Anthem's faults across the board. And now that the game is gone for good, I think it's time not to just be looking back at what could have been for the game, but to be looking forward on how to avoid its replication in today's gaming space. Realistically, I don't think these problems will ever fully go away, but I think that these conversations are really important to have about why these things happen instead of what just had happened. Going forward, I hope that BioWare can rise back up from this pit they've gotten themselves into, even if many of the people who built it have left. And although Anthem is gone forever, I'm still praying I could see it return in some fashion, whether it be another attempt one day, or even just a way to use the flight mechanics in a future Mass Effect. It's in space after all, just give me something! Whatever happens, I hope that this video has given anybody watching some things to think about as we navigate through this industry and what gets thrown at us going forward. If you made it this far, I hope you enjoyed and understood what I had to say. This is my first video on this channel and my first time ever really attempting any sort of scripted video, so excuse my nervousness or the fact that this video is like 5 days late from the shutdown day. So I hope you got the point across, since I know I love to yap, but if you appreciated the video, I'd appreciate it a ton if you left a like and subscribe for more. For this channel, Review2, I plan to make videos like these, talks about gaming news, gaming topics, new releases, etc. And I've been passionate about making a channel like this for years, and write down ideas whenever one pops in my head. So more is for sure to come. In the meantime, I do have a main channel and Twitch where I'm gaming all the time, between games old and new, if you ever wanted to see what else I've got going on. But enough of me yapping, because as you can see, I love to do that. Have a good one, and rest in peace to my goat that never could, Anthem.